It's numerous times that you're trying to, again, prove our worth and our value. You already said first of all, if she's in that position, she's already probably overly qualified for the role. Similar to Kamala, right? So if that is the case, I can, especially now that they're trying to take away DEI and all this other good stuff, if you really want to be honest about it, then Black women should be running this entire country from all the companies and everything else, because 9 times out of 10, we are overly qualified because we don't have that option of not being.
Yeah.
So with that being the case, I want people, Black women in particular, take ownership of your power, but also recognize that's not my job. That's not my job.
I'm not afraid to write a brand new story. And when changes find a way to me, I can keep it moving. I'm not afraid to celebrate my glory. And when challenges grace my path, I know I can face another day. Inside, I rise, daring to learn. With Fox After 40.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Fox After 40. I'm your host, Kim Lewis, CEO and co-founder of CurlMix, and today we're talking about rest after 40. Because if you were like me, you were a part of that 92%. Okay, you know what I mean. And there's a lot going on the internet right now with new administration, all the things, and how are you managing rest and your political activism and all the things. Well, we have a special guest here, licensed therapist, Lauren Michelle here. But before I get to Lauren, I'm going to go ahead and give you a bit about her bio. Lauren Michelle Jackson is a licensed clinical professional counselor, LCPC, certified domestic violence professional, CDVP, and certified life coach, consultant, and distinguished speaker. She is the founder and owner of Cultivate Your Essence, a mental health practice dedicated to providing culturally responsive coaching, counseling, and consulting services to empower women, particularly Black women and women of color, to embrace their full potential. Welcome to the podcast, Lauren.
Thank you.
So Lauren, you are not new here, right? You were on our last season, so thank you so much for coming back.
Of course.
And I would get into like your background, but you qualified, okay? You qualified, and it's on the previous episode. Feel free to hit any big accolades you want to, but I really want to jump right into the episode.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so I'll just give you a little bit of anecdote, a little bit of my own story. I am a social justice warrior.
You are. Actually, yeah. I be reposting your stuff all the time on Instagram. I was like, oh my God, she's speaking. I'd be taking my notes down. I'm like, yeah,
and my team is like, she is not supposed to be talking about this or this. Oh my God.
But it's necessary. It's necessary what you do.
Thank you. And so what I have found for me and my peace is actually to say something. Because if I'm sitting with it bottled up, my anger, my frustration. I'll give you an example. I was at a dinner one time with these other business owners, and this guy, this white guy, was advocating for voting for Trump. And this is like basically back in like, I don't know, October. It was like before the election. He's like, oh, the election's in a couple of weeks. I was like, no, the election's in a week. What are you talking about? And then he was just advocating, and he was certain all that's happening right now, as of today is what is this, February? That none of this stuff was actually going to happen. And, you know, being a part of the 92%, we know what happens because we've been on the bottom for so long that we can see it coming, we can see it. So I would love to know, how are you recommending to your clients, and particularly the 92% of Black women who voted for Kamala, how are you recommending that they like deal with this current administration and the current climate?
Well, one of the biggest things that I like what you said was that you recognize that speaking up is a part of your power. So what I need for women, especially us, a part of that 92%, is to figure out what is your power and how do you want to exercise it? Because I think a lot of times, especially we as Black women, have a tendency of overstretching ourselves across the board.
Yep.
Right? And so now we find ourselves at a place where it's like, y'all don't respect us. Y'all don't appreciate us. Cool. I'm going to be mindful of where I give my time. I'm going to be mindful where I give my voice. I'm going to be mindful where I give my energy, because now I recognize you guys will never prioritize me. So now it has become more apparent that we have to prioritize ourselves. And that's not a luxury. That's a necessity. And I think one of the biggest problems is we always go above and beyond, one, because we're conditioned to do so. But also, too, it's more about we already know, I think Trevor Noah said it best. If you want to find out what America is really like, talk to a Black woman, because we can't F around and find out. Because if something happens to the greater majority, it's going to impact us the most. So now it's more so, how do you reclaim your power back is really being intentional about where you give your power to. So that is a part of the biggest things that I've been talking to my clients about. And we're not watching the news. Let's be very clear. There's many ways of staying informed. Watching the news every so often, being mindful of what is going to trigger your anxiety, being mindful of how you actually feel every time you hear Trump's name or whatever the next craziest thing we wake up to, right?
Right.
Because you got to think about it. This is no different than what happened in his first term. It's just amplified because now he's coming back on a vengeance and he has a lot of support behind him. So now it's more so just, if you can just stay informed and know what your boundaries are around that, stay informed, but do not allow it to consume you. Because I think that's where we kind of get caught up in. You talked about being like a social justice warrior, which honestly, I love it. Because a lot of times I used to be like that, but then it's kind of like, oh, I gotta preserve my energy, especially for showing up for clients or showing up for my team, which is a team of Black women. Yeah. And so I gotta be mindful of how all these things are impacting me. So I really want people to take the time to really think, if I do have to jump in, right? Because I am going to prioritize my rest. Where can my talents be best served? Yeah. And stay in that lane. Don't give more. Don't give less. Give what you know you can actually give.
I love that you said stay in your lane. I realized, okay, Kim, your whole platform is not social justice warrior, right? You can pop out with an opinion. Yeah. But like, that's not your everyday post because you're not a political activist. I might be an activist. I'm not a political one. And so I just, I like to...
I challenge you on that.
What do you mean?
You are political.
No. Yes. But
in your own lane.
I'm comparing myself to someone like Booker Squared online, where her whole platform is like political. She's a lawyer. She knows law. She's checking the news every day, every hour. You know what I'm saying? I was like, so clearly, I meant like somebody on a really like, she's a political activist. I am an activist and I can get political, but I care about a lot of issues and things like that.
And the only reason why I wanted to push back on you about that is because, again, I don't want us taken away from ourselves. And a lot of times I have to catch my clients with that, and my therapist has to catch me. You take ownership of that, because what you're doing is still feeding our community. It's still giving something to somebody else. Yeah. And it forces us to think outside of the box when it comes to those things, right? Gotcha. So take ownership of that. That's not my entire identity, but that's a big part of your identity.
I have an investor of mine. She's very powerful Black woman, walked into work the next day, and it was just like, after the election, and everybody was like snickering and almost happy. You know what I mean? And so now she has to kind of go back and, doing things like Black History Month or like all these things that kind of like, she feels like she has to educate her community. The people that she works with who don't really fully understand the importance of Black History Month, or that the Black man created the traffic light, or, peanut butter, all these different things, you know what I'm saying? How are you advising your clients to deal with those that work in an environment where they might be dealing with a bunch of folks who voted for Trump?
It's not your job to educate them. If you want to, that's one thing. If you see that there's value in it, that's another thing. But you're not obligated to teach them anything. Again, we have been so conditioned to code switch, to be overly empathetic, and to try to educate. But we also have to take into consideration, who are we educating? And is it going to fall on deaf ears? So again, are you exerting energy that is not necessary for you to exert? And at the end of those conversations, I would even challenge her to say, how do you feel after you have those conversations? And 9 times out of 10, it's not just once. It's not just twice. It's numerous times that you're trying to, again, prove our worth and our value. You already said, first of all, if she's in that position, she's already probably overly qualified for the role. Similar to Kamala, right? So if that is the case, I can, especially now that they're trying to take away DEI and all this other good stuff, if you really want to be honest about it, then Black women should be running this entire country from all the companies and everything else, because 9 times out of 10, we are overly qualified because we don't have that option of not being. Yeah. So with that being the case, I want people, Black women in particular, take ownership of your power, but also recognize that's not my job. That's not my job.
If you've gotten any value from listening to Fox After 40, you learned a beauty tip, you've gotten advice, you shared the episode with a friend, please do us a favor and leave us a review on Spotify and Apple. It goes a very long way in helping us continue to build the podcast. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next episode. How do you recommend people maintain a sense of hope?
Well, unfortunately, and fortunately, we're not, how do I want to put this? We're not new to this. Unfortunately and fortunately, we are very resilient. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately and fortunately, we know how to overcome. We're just tired of always being in this position. Mm-hmm. Right? So one thing about, I remember my COO of my practice, she said, I'm going to butcher it, but she always says, the economy always seems to work itself out. Right? I mean, Jesus, I hope it hurry us and does so soon. But
don't we all? Everybody's on a budget.
Baby. Because Beyonce, you ain't getting my coin this time. I'm sorry. But
we love you, B.
We love you. Now, if somebody wants to bless, then that's a different story. But, we have to keep that into consideration. Everything has a tendency of working itself out. And one of the biggest things is, yes, while we're advocating for this 92%, yes, while we're advocating for, us taking our rest, we also have to recognize we still have to be a part of the fight. We just have to be mindful of when it's time for us to tag ourselves in and when it's time for us to tag ourselves out.
Right. We don't have to go first now.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Make them work for this. Like it's so, I don't know if you've been on TikTok, but you saw it's like a MAGA regress trend.
Oh, yeah. And people are like denouncing the community and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's kind of just like they recognize, everything that he said he was going to do, he's doing it now. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's one thing
and for more things they didn't know that were going to happen. They're like, I didn't know that was going to be, fire a bunch of federal employees and all that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of just like now it's more so I've been noticing Black women's reaction to it. And it's just like, okay. Yeah. Now let's allow them to figure some things out.
Yeah.
Because like I said, we know how to overcome, but I think sometimes our hardest part is sitting still.
Yeah.
Because our nature is to come in and fix. That's not our job. It's not even my job as a therapist to fix my client. My job is to support you. My job is to educate you. My job is to give you the tools. It's still on you to do those things that we worked on in session, right? We're only together for 60 minutes. Outside of that is where your life actually takes place. Yeah. So now you got to take everything that you've learned in that session and be able to apply it in real time. Everything it's not always going to rain forever. It's not always going to be terrible for forever. But how do you maintain? How do you keep yourself centered, anchored? How are you taking care of yourself? Because another big thing is I know we like to use self-care as like, it's a trendy word. No. How are you actually going to prioritize your self-care?
Yeah.
So, if I know watching the news is going to give me anxiety, I don't need to watch the news. I can find other ways of staying informed. If I recognize I need to go to bed 30 minutes earlier so I can get my sleep and I can be well adjusted for the next, I'm going to do that. Again, little simple things. I don't want people thinking, I got to go on a trip. I got to have all this money. No, you need to honor what your body and your mindset is telling you. And that is how you prioritize your rest. So a lot of times we already know what we need to do, but we're just so fidgety. We want to be in everything. That's not our job.
This is interesting because as you're saying all these things, my brain is going, but, you know what I mean? Like,
but allow the but. You can allow the but to come through. Mm-hmm. You still don't have to respond. The feeling is valid. The thought is valid.
So then I think about that, right? I think about, Black women resting. And I love the concept. Love the idea of us sitting back and letting other folks do it. And, I'm very familiar with the idea that, Black folks fought for civil rights in the 60s. And because we did, so many other people got rights too. You know what I mean? Latino people got rights, you know what I mean? Asian Americans got more rights. Women, it was more like, okay, we got to make this a bit more equal for everybody. It wasn't just about Black people. But now people thought, Black people and just immigrants are going to be under attack. And now it's really everybody. It's everybody who's not a white man is kind of under attack. And so my fear is that with us resting and deciding to be quiet, it's like, nobody's going to do it. That's one of my fears. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like, and that may not be true, right?
I think we're too scared to test out that theory. And it's fair.
Do you see the energetic discomfort in my body? Like, don't
get
nothing?
me wrong. Don't get me wrong. And like I said earlier, pick and choose your lane that you want to participate in.
Okay.
So it's not saying that we just completely avoid altogether. We got to be realistic. That's why I said we're still a part of the fight.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Pick and choose your lane that you need to be a part of.
What does rest look like for some people? So I know we talked about cutting off the TV.
Yeah.
We could talk about maybe not doom scrolling on social. You know, trying to curate your feed maybe.
Yeah, that's a big one.
What else can you do to find rest?
You know what? I hate talking about that part because I think people think when I say it, it's going to look so simplistic. But it's seriously, what does your body and your mind need? You know, now I'm kind of getting into a morning routine where, you know, instead of trying to force myself to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, I'm like, okay, that don't work for me, right? So now it's kind of like I get up in the morning. Instead of trying to pray, because it's like at that point, I'm just babbling. God don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying. So now it's kind of like, okay, I get up. I give myself like 15 minutes of nothing. And then from there, I kind of go into what's next, my devotional. Okay, cool. And then from there, I can check my email. And then I can do. It's really in alignment to what your body needs and honoring that. And I think a big part of that, too, is a lot of times because we're not being intentional about paying attention to ourselves, we're just going on autopilot. Yeah. So a lot of times with my clients, I say, okay, if you're starting your day, give yourself some time just to kind of mentally prepare. Where am I at today? Am I at an 8? And am I at 10? Am I at a 2? You give yourself that number. From that number, you're going to only operate from what that number you deem you have for that day, right? So if I'm at a 2, I'm not going to operate like I'm at a 10. I'm not going to operate like I'm at an 8. I'm not even going to operate like I'm at a 1. I can give you the best of what I got at a 2 because that way I'm preserving my energy for when I do have to push through, then I have that. That's in the reserve tank. But if every time I'm trying to push through in every moment, what's in my reserve? It's kind of just simple like when we're driving our cars and then that ding like, oh, you need to put some gas. Yeah, we know there's some gas in that reserve, but if you keep pushing it, you're going to be stranded somewhere. And so when we talk about this concept of rest, it's really being honest with yourself. What does my body and my mind need in this season of my life? And that's going to change as you get older, especially when we're talking about after 40, right? What I needed in my 20s doesn't work in my 30s. What I'm doing in my 30s, and I'm about to be 40 next year, I'm sure it's going to be different, right?
How has that changed over the years? What were you doing for rest in your 20s?
Oh, God, I wasn't resting. I was working 3 or 4 jobs. I was building a brand. I was outside. I didn't think about rest. I would leave vacation and get on a plane, hop into my job right off the plane.
But didn't you tell me a lot of your clients who are over 40 are superwomen? And so, you know, they're not really resting in the after 40 either. You know what I mean?
What did I tell y'all last time when we was on here?
What?
Do you get back pay for being superwoman? So we're working through.
In the end, there's a reward.
No, it ain't. That's the problem. Y'all have created these false rewards in your head. There's no reward. The reward is burnout. The reward is I'm more agitated. And the reward is when I get to a place of accomplishment, I can't even appreciate it.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Fox After 40 and want to get notified about the next episode when it drops, make sure to go to CurlMix.com and sign up for our mailing list. We'll notify you whenever a new episode comes out. You know, I want to ask you something. You know how people deal with, like, anxiety?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have someone on my team who, you know, she really struggles with anxiety. Always has. You know, it comes from trauma.
Yeah.
As a child. Is that something you can actually heal or fix?
Oh, okay, so we always want to be mindful not to use the word fix.
Okay.
Manage. That is the biggest thing, because if you can manage things as they come and they go, right? And sometimes our anxieties get triggered at different parts, like a little bit more heightened in different areas of our lives, right? You can have the coping skills, which is great, you know, meditating, grounding, talking to your therapist, journaling, doing all those things, breathing, because I think a lot of times people forget to breathe on an everyday basis, and that is like your body's and your mind's natural reset. And then sometimes, if I'm being honest, medication is necessary. So I'll even be honest, I take anti-anxiety medication as needed.
Okay.
Because during COVID, things kind of really got ramped up, especially being a therapist during that time period. And that was something I had to even reconcile with myself, because I was like, I don't want to have to do this. I'm a therapist. I should be able to. No, the reality is sometimes you need additional help. That it doesn't matter how much you talk about it, all these other good things. It's still it's still something that you got to work through, right? And sometimes it is a matter of you'll be able to manage it in certain areas of your life, but in certain, like the woman that you were talking about earlier and the job, if she got to walk into that all the time, and she's probably I don't like to say the token, but if she's the one of the few, I can only imagine what her anxiety is like every time I have to educate, every time I got to walk into these spaces, every time, especially when you are the only, every time, right? So I want us in our community, especially for Black people and people of color, we need to recognize this is not it's not a diminishing factor of who we are.
Okay.
It's no different. Like, let's say my mom is a survivor of breast cancer. She still has to take that medication every day to make sure it doesn't come back. It's the same way as far as I recognize my anxiety is getting to the place where it can be crippling. So why not take the medicine that I know can help to balance me out? Because again, you're not going to get a reward for trying to figure this out or fix.
What are some signals that you might want to consider medication for your anxiety?
So one of the biggest things is that it is a really hard time to rev yourself down. Like it's kind of like a constant spiraling where it starts off with one thing and then it leads to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's kind of just like, well, wait a minute. If I spilled the water on the floor, why can't the paper towel just be enough? Right? So it's kind of to the place where sometimes we recognize situation from situation, it might be hard to grasp ourselves, right? But eventually we get there. When we're talking about more chronic, it means that the ruminating thoughts are spiraling so much in your mindset. It doesn't matter who you're talking to or who is trying to help you out in that moment. You're not able to really catch yourself, right? So, and then also too, when you're talking to like a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist, there's a lot of assessments and stuff that we can take as well.
Okay.
And typically when you're getting on medication, it's going to be like a little bit of a ramp up to see what works for you, because some people may need higher dosages. Some people may need just 5 or 10 just to kind of be like, oh, okay. And then it's also like a body chemistry thing, because you got to also recognize, what is it, epigenetics that we were talking about, how some of these things are just I can't get it, but it's kind of genetically passed down from our family members, right? So like there could be like, when we're doing our assessments, does anybody in your family kind of suffer from mental illness? No, but I remember when mom used to be just in the room all the time and she would just stay in the dark and wouldn't talk to anybody. So she was depressed. Okay. How does that show up for you and how did you respond? Well, I recognize that every time when I feel some type of way, I just kind of resort to just being by myself. And okay, so then there is a pattern there, right? Okay. And a lot of times it's no different than when we see people with substance abuse and how that can kind of show up in the family genes as well. So paying attention to those different aspects, that is going to give you your baseline, right? How do I normally respond? And then when things are elevated, how easy or hard is it for me to bring myself back down to the baseline? And you got to be honest with yourself, but also honest with the people that you're bringing in to help you, so we can actually have a clear assessment of what we're working with.
And what are some, do you recommend any natural things before you go to medicine?
Yeah, like, okay, so one of the biggest things is too, we're both from Chicago. Yeah. We recognize seasonal depression is real just because we're not getting a lot of the sunlight, right? And so when I moved from Chicago to Atlanta, my mood changed drastically just because we had more access to the sun, because the weather is better, right? So now when we're talking about different things, let's say you don't have that privilege of being able to move. Now you have to kind of cheat your atmosphere. So, creating maybe a room where there's a yellow wall, right? But again, it represents something that's bright, that helps your mindset to think of something outside of the dreariness. Again, I can't stress this enough. The meditation is a huge part of it because it at least helps to center and ground you. And what I love is I always tell my clients, go on YouTube. They got a meditation for literally everything.
They really do.
They really do. And don't start off trying to do 30 minutes. Literally 5 to 3 minutes. That's what you start with, and you ramp yourself up. Another huge part of this, and we're working with nutritionists, the food that we eat. It really does. When they say you are what you eat, it really does make a difference, because especially, let's say if you're not good at managing your emotions and your first go-to is to eat, are you eating things that are typically healthy?
No, you're going to, the chips, the ice cream,
exactly,
the things that make you feel good.
And the thing is, it's a temporary. You're going to feel good for that first 10 minutes, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to even hate yourself even more.
That's so interesting. I remember one time I lost a bunch of weight, but I would just, if I wanted a thing, I would take the first 2 spoonfuls and then not eat the rest. So I was getting my dopamine hit. And then basically, but not getting all of the calories that came with the full thing. Yep. I just learned something there.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
We don't think about it. And that's why I'm always big on pay attention to yourself. Be very intentional about learning who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we as that 92% needs to do better care of, because we are conditioned to know how to show up for everybody else. We don't know how to show up for ourselves. And so I think we have to do a better job of not only teaching everybody else how to show up for us, but literally knowing what we need so we can teach them how to properly show up for us.
And this will be my last question and we can wrap, but what does anxiety feel like in the body? Like, I know you mentioned the question, they're like, oh, the water, and then I got to get a new carpet, and like all the things, the problems that but how do I know I'm anxious just from the way that my body is experiencing a moment?
Okay. So this is going to look different for everybody, right? Sometimes it might be a tapping. Like, I can't sit still. Like, my foot is restless, right? Yeah, It could be like the throbbing in the back of your head, where it's kind of like there's nothing medically wrong, but I just feel tension all throughout here, right? It could be a matter of my breathing is now shallow and it's hard for me to catch my breath, right? And pay attention to different things that might trigger you to where, like, let's say I had a client that hate being lost. And so when she hated being lost, especially when she's driving and she's by herself or the GPS isn't working, she literally has to pull over to breathe because her vision is becoming blurred.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So again, it's paying attention to little things, right? Is your heart palpitating a little bit more than usual? What's typically going on that's triggering that in the first place, right? If you find yourself maybe eating and it's like, okay, am I eating because I'm actually hungry or am I worried about something? I had clients where they would just itch and I'm like, is something irritating your skin? It was like, no, I didn't even pay attention that that's what I was doing, right?
Yeah.
My mom told me about that when I was younger too, and it's funny how I see that in my clients. But those are like little things just to pay attention to. And a lot of times we'll see it, but we'll be like, oh, it's nothing. I do that all the time. No, get curious about that. Get curious about it. Your body is typically your first indicator something is wrong.
Oof.
We just don't pay attention.
Any tips to regulate your body?
Breathing.
Okay.
When I say taking a second to breathe, the box breathing, the breathing at the top and holding it and then slowly letting it out. When you're breathing in, making sure you're letting it all out, because a lot of times, again, we forget to breathe.
Yeah.
And the more you're forgetting it, your brain isn't operating functionally. There's not oxygen getting to you up there. So again, breathing. Breathe. Take a minute, turn off the phone, turn off the car, whatever. Take a second just to breathe.
Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the pod and helping us deal as the 92% and manage our anxiety. I appreciate you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
You guys, stay tuned. Our next episode with Lauren is going to be about dating after 40. And you're going to want to hear this from a therapist, okay? Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out our curly hair care products at CurlMix if you're interested in our wash and goes or blowouts or anything to make your hair more beautiful. All right, you guys. I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.